Devil May Cry is an action-adventure hack-and-slash released on the PS2 in 2001, developed and published by Capcom, and created by Hideki Kamiya. I played the HD collection port on the PS4. Devil May Cry follows demon hunter Dante. Dante encounters Trish, who tells him that Mundus, the killer of Dante's mother, is planning to return and that only he can stop Mundus. The story immediately establishes and makes Dante's motivations clear. Not only is demon hunting his job, but there's a personal motivation to get revenge for his family and stop Mundus. I enjoyed the game's story. It's nice and contained. It only follows 3 to 4 characters, but all the characters that are included share some sort of important relationship to each other or the plot. I think it was a good decision to include a small cast of characters as to not distract from the gameplay. The game has a strong personality. Dante is an interesting main character and shows off a few sides of himself during the game, keeping him from feeling one-dimensional. A few of the bosses get dialogue, and their serious and adamant nature allow Dante to steal the spotlight with his contrasting, carefree, and witty attitude. He also has the skills to back up that charm. The game's plot is simple but good. It wraps up nicely. You'll explore Mallet Island. The game's world feels connected and it's fun to explore. You start in a castle but quickly explore the rest of the castle grounds and neighboring areas. I found that they were able to provide enough visual variety while still keeping a consistent theme. There's a really nice blend of combat and exploration, and I think that's one of this game's greatest strengths. The mission-based structure mainly serves as a checkpoint system that saves your progress and has you explore different parts of the island while retaining the cohesive feel. You can find that blend of combat and exploration in the upgrade system as well. If you explore the world thoroughly, you'll find currency, consumables, permanent health upgrades, and even new weapons for Dante to use. These upgrades feed back into the combat, as you'll be able to spend the currency on new moves and use the new melee weapons and firearms to create new combos. The combat feels slow but deliberate. The game is perfectly designed around its speed, and even the defensive options require intention and focus. Rolling feels weighty but useful. You still need to be careful when and where you roll. I'm not an expert in this genre of games. That being said, I found this game's combat extremely digestible. The combo mechanics made sense to me, and I felt I could naturally figure out which attacks comboed into which, just by playing around with the game. It felt rewarding taking the different attacks and linking them together one at a time. The more I experimented, the more I learned about the more subtle but advanced interactions, like using guns to keep enemies in the air, with the Devil Trigger variant sending them higher in the air, juggling the enemy. Devil Trigger is a temporary, stronger form Dante can take, complete with its own visual design. Fighting enemies builds the Devil Trigger meter, and using Devil Trigger will drain the meter. Devil Trigger provides a fast running speed, extra damage, faster attacks, new abilities, healing, and other advantages. Devil Trigger is very useful, but you still have to play smart on when and where to use it. In some cases, Devil Trigger is even used to find collectibles in the environment. Performing different combos by timing your inputs was a very clever way of doing things. It simplifies inputs while still requiring focus, so that you time your button presses correctly. Other attack commands require you first hold a button to focus on the enemy. Once focused, you must move the control stick either in front of Dante or behind him to execute the desired command. Rolling works similarly, as when you're focused on an enemy, you must hold the control stick either to the left or right, and press roll to roll in that direction. This is one part of the combat that I didn't like. You can only roll left and right, you can't roll forward or backward. If you try to roll forward or backward, you just jump instead. Due to the camera, I found myself jumping quite often when I intended to roll, causing me to take hits. Jumping can be done very easily, just with the press of the designated button, so having it also tied to rolling seems confusing. I think separating the ability to jump from the rolling commands, and adding a forward and backward roll, would make rolling more consistent and give you a few more mobility options. The combat's complexity and experimentation comes into play by finding new melee weapons and firearms in the environments, and buying new attacks at the store. You'll be spending a currency made throughout the game on new attacks, so you'll slowly add even more moves into your combos. The more complicated and stylish your combos, the more currency you'll earn, rewarding good gameplay. This is really smart because if you're a fast learner, you'll be able to afford moves and upgrades faster, allowing you to expand the game's mechanics sooner, passing a natural gateway the game sets. The progression naturally scales to the player in a way that most wouldn't even consider. If you're a slow player and having a hard time, You can focus on the basic combos and spend your currency on healing and consumable items instead. I understand the need to slowly add new attacks to your weapons in order to not overwhelm the player, and to also keep them interested with new unlockables. But I think these games are at their best when you feel stronger by having a better grasp on the execution of the game's existing mechanics through practice, rather than unlocking moves and abilities. However, progression feels good. Mastering the combat system, finding new weapons, buying new moves, health upgrades, and Devil Trigger upgrades at the store all contribute to making Dante stronger over time. Both firearms and melee attacks auto-snap to enemies during combat, and while it's helpful most of the time, sometimes it can cause issues when trying to hit specific enemies or when trying to interact with objects and switches. There are times when I want to hit certain enemies or objects just to have Dante whiff and swing in the opposite direction. It would be nice to see this auto-snap when the control stick's in a neutral position, but prioritize where the control stick's pointed when attacking. The enemies in Devil May Cry are very well designed in combat. They gradually get harder or appear in more numbers. They also require different strategies in order to deal with efficiently. Bosses get reused, but none of them felt lazy or overstayed their welcome, minus one being Nightmare. The reoccurring bosses evolved and got stronger alongside Dante and the player. It felt good rematching these bosses a few times, just enough change with the environments and their movesets, but not enough that I didn't feel satisfaction from my victories being a result of me getting better at the game. The only time the combat felt weird was when there were flying enemies or enemies with smaller hitboxes, like the boss Griffin or the enemies Sin Scissors and Scythe. Devil May Cry's combat feels its best when you're able to mix and match attacks with both your melee and firearm weapons. When an enemy's flying around or has a weird hitbox, it becomes harder to use all the tools available to you in a satisfying way. However, what DMC does to alleviate this is include strategies or timing-based attacks that make them vulnerable to a lot of damage. Devil May Cry's core design is so smart. While the game is focused and designed to challenge you, it lets you play how you want and doesn't force you to play it any certain way. For players that want to have a casual experience, an automatic easy mode is offered early in the game that ties the combos into a single button press. Beyond that, items are available at the shop that can heal Dante, fill Devil Trigger meter, make you invulnerable for a short time, damage enemies, and provide more continues. The game is tough, but it can still be completed by those who are able to master all of the game's mechanics. On the other end of the spectrum, those who want an intense challenge need to worry about their score and grade. You'll get ranked in every mission based on how fast you clear the mission, how stylish your combos are, and how much you get hit. Playing for a good rank will force you to perfect the game's combat mechanics and combos, as well as not use consumable items as it impacts your grade. The game gives you the tools to play how you want and get familiar with the mechanics, then shows you its high skill ceiling. There's such a different feeling playing the game from a casual standpoint, a hardcore standpoint, or anything in between, but the game never forces you to play a certain way. Devil May Cry features a mix of static fixed camera angles and dynamic fixed camera angles. I really like fixed camera angles as it allows a lot of creative control on the developer side. However, I think this kind of camera style thrives the most in survival horror games because it limits visible information and only focuses on the important information, crafting unique moments. When you take this approach and translate it to an action-adventure hack and slash, problems will start to show. I want to stress that this game is still very fun and very playable with its current camera. I just think it's important to talk about how the camera can be improved upon. Information is important during combat, and I found a lot of times where I wish I had more. The camera can either be pretty close to Dante or be angled in a way where the whole room isn't shown. It looks nice, and most of the time the camera's close, while being able to keep the important information on screen. But other times, like in wider rooms, there are situations where enemies are off screen but still able to hit you. Even with the current camera, as long as you're spatially aware of your surroundings and listen for enemies, you can be prepared for what's around you. But in terms of accessibility, these are workarounds to something that I see as a problem. There are times like the Coliseum Griffin fights, where the game expects you to move to a new area and tries to convey this just by changing the camera and not focusing on the boss. That alone doesn't communicate enough information. Or fights like ones with Nightmare, where you need to continuously shift your attention back and forth from the boss to the switches. But due to the pillars and the camera, you either have one or the other on screen, and you don't get a good sense of when to switch priorities. The game is in a 3D space, so you could do a lot with the camera without making major alterations. changes that keep the original version while improving the camera for combat. I would separate the camera into two types, one for combat and one for exploration. The fixed camera angles would keep their creative, focused, and immersive look during exploration, and a free, pulled back, controllable camera could be used in order to show all of the important information during combat. Less drastically, you could just pull the camera back during combat, as it would still solve most of the combat area's problems. Lastly, if you really want to keep the fixed angles through the whole game, you could have multiple angles for each space that you could manually switch between. However, the more you need to manually fix the camera during combat, the more that's a problem. The files for enemies and bosses are a genius addition to Devil May Cry. If you meet certain criteria during combat, more parts of the enemy's file will be filled out, giving you additional detail and insight on working strategies and tips. I love that this information is easily accessible within the game, rather than needing to use external sources. The files could have been found in the environment, but I feel it would have slowed the game down too much. Having them unlocked during combat instead encourages you to discover strategies firsthand, and naturally rewards you with helpful knowledge, which in turn allows you to get better at the game and master future encounters. The game's art style is really strong. Dante has a striking red outfit, making him stand out and reinforcing his attitude. Enemies and bosses have really interesting gothic horror designs that have so much detail put into them. The game can suffer in certain areas for having muddy environments. The environments are bleak, but they do contain a lot of nice deep colors. There was plenty of visual variety, making the areas distinct from one another, while still keeping a consistent theme. Just as the gameplay has its mix of exploration and combat, so does the music. During exploration, you'll hear quiet ambient tracks, and during the high-tension combat, you'll hear rock music. The quieter tracks have a holy and gothic style to them, with piano, strings, and organs fitting the theme and environments quite nicely. The ambient tracks allow me to slow down and breathe, and change gears during the breaks in combat. The combat music contains powerful guitar, drums, and electronic, pumping me up for whatever stands in Dante's way. I played through the game without items, so the main game took me about 12 hours to beat, but there's so much here for people who enjoyed the first playthrough and want more out of it. Hard mode and Dante Must Die are unlockable difficulties that increase enemy damage and health, among other gameplay tweaks. There's a New Game Plus where you can start from the beginning with all your upgrades. You can play through the game again in order to find all the extra weapons, firearms, and other upgrades. The most time-consuming but most satisfying challenge to undertake would be to perfect the game and get S ranks for each mission. It would be nice if there was an arcade mode of sorts, so that you could boot up the game and start a fresh file containing all weapons and abilities, just so that you could jump in and play. It's important to talk about the original PS2 release because of its regional differences. In the US release of DMC1, Dante's attacks do less damage compared to the Japanese version or normal and hard mode. Dante takes more damage from regular enemies compared to the Japanese versions on all modes. The normal difficulty is the most important difficulty setting in any game. It's the developer's intended difficulty, and the games are designed with that certain difficulty in mind. When you alter the game's difficulty to make it harder, you're messing with the original vision. On top of that, this game already supports difficulty settings, so a better solution would have just been to have hard mode and Dante Must Die modes unlocked from the beginning. By not giving the players a choice and also misleading them with harder normal difficulty, it only harms accessibility and has the chance to scare players away. That being said, I do not recommend the original PS2 release due to the harder difficulty. Since I played the HD collection, I played with the difficulty scaling of the original Japanese release. I thought the game was challenging, fair, and satisfying. The game was hard, but once you know what to do, all the missions are very short, so most levels never felt too discouraging when I had to start from the beginning of a mission. With great characters, a great story, a cohesive world, and well-paced but challenging combat, Devil May Cry was a wonderful game to play through. The slow and deliberate core combat felt great to play around with and experiment with. It contains only minor camera and combat quirks that can easily be overlooked. It gives the player the freedom to play and enjoy the game however they like, but with the intense challenge that delivers an extremely high skill ceiling. You get out what you put into the game, creating a highly replayable formula for those up for the challenge. There's so much under the hood that, as the veterans say, once you beat the game, the tutorial is over.